Hey guys, Palsteron here, and today let's talk about Blade Trap. So if you don't know what this League Start series is, usually around about month 3 of a league, I kind of get tired of the current league and I just want to test for example, this time 3.18, and we're going to start picking out skills that I haven't really played before or builds that kind of feel like they might have some potential. And if they succeed, once 3.18 patch notes can come out, we can kind of look at it, compare notes. If nothing changed, well, this might be something you want to play. This time around, we had kind of a doozy. And I am just going to spare you the usual, this was my build, this is how I tried it, right? Because I don't really think you should do this at all. But basically what I can tell you is we got up to level 80. And I know what you're going to say, that's not too much, right? You could have tried it until like invitations or something. But we did reach red maps already. And at this point, we had like a weapon that wasn't crazy good, but it was very, very close to what you can expect at a League Start scenario, right? You're not going to go for a 10 plus exalted weapon. And the reason it's a foil, just real quickly, instead of a claw, is because of the weapon range. Foils actually have the largest weapon range out of one-handers that you can use on Blade Trap, and it does scale the AoE of the skill. That's why, just heads up. We had okay gear overall. There was nothing wrong with our gear that would make it so at League Start you would usually get better gear, right? It was very much like 3-ish exalted. We even had a 6-link, that's not too bad, right? Maybe even 3.5 exalts. There was nothing wrong with the build. This skill should have worked on this, so that's why we kind of called it a day at level 80, just to point that out. Overall, we say the defenses held up pretty well, but the offenses just weren't there. But let's get into the skill now. So looking at Blade Trap, this is a very interesting skill. It has very little tags. It has trap, attack, and AoE. So usually most traps would be spell-based. This one is not. And that basically comes with its own downsides and a few upsides. Number one, it's actually scales off of your weapon, right? But that being said, that is not too much of an upside in a League Start scenario because you have to actually invest into the weapons instead of having a spell that can just scale off of levels for free, basically. So already we're setting up ourselves up for failure, but let me show you the skill real quick. So basically, let's actually put this off so we can see the skill. So once these traps activate, you will see there's a Blade Trap here and it rotates for 4 times. And all of these rotations can actually overlap. And after it stopped rotating, the trap will disappear. Looking at the gem further, we can see that it has 93.9% of base damage. Obviously, this is only level 18. At level 20, it's somewhere around 96%, I think, which might look good at first, right? You might think, oh, 96%, it hits 4 times. But there's a lot more to it, a lot more problems to it. So it says the trap lasts for a second, rotates 4 times, right? And then you have rotation speed if dual wielding. And not only that, but it also gives you +1 rotation while dual wielding, which sounds pretty cool, right? Might sound like it incentivizes you to dual wield, but in the end, actually, shields are just too strong, and this is too little incentive, right? It might sound like much, but if you think about it, most attack builds also don't go dual wield, and they also have incentives to go dual wield. So why don't they, right? This is basically a very similar scenario. You have to kind of trade off defenses for offenses, and unless you want to be super glass cannon, trading off your shield, not that good of an idea. Also, we're actually using Leaguestart, which we're going to go over a little bit later. But yeah, there's a few problems with this build. So next up, Blade Trap, when it came out, had a very bad AoE. As you can see here, it is actually kind of fixed. I would say that AoE is definitely not the problem of this build anymore. The problem is straight up the damage and the scaling. You can definitely make it work with a lot of exalts, but in a League Start scenario, I would say probably stay away from it. But first, some other interesting things to know about Blade Trap. The AoE scales with weapon radius. So this skill actually has a base AoE that is based off of your weapon. And that is important because that is the only reason why we're using a foil, right? Because foils have a weapon range innately of 14. And something like a claw, right, which you might think we want, only has a weapon range of 11. Daggers only have a weapon range of 10. And just to clarify, you can only use one-handed swords, claws, or daggers for the skill. But important to note is that it's only the base weapon range. There is a lot of weapon range that is called melee strike range on the passive tree, like Master of the Arena, right? Like some of the sword-based ones. These do not work because Blade Trap is not a strike. Therefore, you do not get this added to your melee range. What you can do, however, is, for example, the Harvest enchant that gives you, at 30 quality, gives you an extra 3 weapon range. Now, secondly, attack speed doesn't do anything. And this is kind of like part of a bigger problem we're going to talk about. But this trap just demands a lot from you and doesn't give you a lot of scaling options. So attack speed does not do anything for the skill, but you still need accuracy. But if you think, oh, Palsteron, I'm just going to fix all of this with a Slave Driver's Hand. No, you're not. Slave Driver's Hand actually only counts for cast speed and not for attack speed. Then another interesting thing is there is actually a alternate quality of Blade Trap that gives you additional rotation speed. This one right here, it gives you up to 40% increased rotation speed. And what this does is the blades that are whirling around are basically just hitting faster, which you might think, oh, that's good for clear speed, etc. Now, in my testing, there has been a lot of weird things. I haven't really seen a post about this, but somebody in chat told me about this. Apparently, it's very similar to Spectral Helix, where the hits actually have an internal cooldown. And if you hit too fast against a stationary target, you might actually lose hits, so to say. And it kind of feels like it, just to be clear. We didn't test it in PvP or anything, but it felt like kind of a downgrade to actually get the rotation speed. It felt a little bit smoother, but it felt like less single target damage. So I don't know if somebody has like a confirmation post about this. I would love to see it, but so far I would stay away from rotation speed, which is one more problem for dual wielding, right? I don't know if 25% rotation speed would do the same, but dual wielding would also give you that rotation speed. But now getting straight into why Blade Trap is kind of meh. So number one, getting accuracy is really, really annoying on a trapper. Now, just to give you a little bit of a feeling why this is a problem, usually what you do is you slap a precision on, and maybe you take one of these wheels and you're done with accuracy, right? But you can't really do that in this build because your reservation is already pretty damn tight because you're going to be running skitter bots. And then if you stay away from, if you do precision, you don't get the crit, right? Because we're poison based. So obviously this is a little bit less of a problem in the crit, in the LE based version. If Omniscience wasn't nerfed, for example, right? We're going to talk about that later. But stuff like attack speed doesn't do anything. So this is completely useless, right? This one here is attack speed, doesn't do anything. This one here is attack speed, right? And then the claw nodes as well. The claw nodes up here also crit, which we're not scaling, and then also crit here. Just in case you're asking, Perfect Agony is not worth it because, and we're going to get to that later, Nightblade support also doesn't work. So just a whole ton of problems, which in the end meant that we kind of had to go with Leaguestart. Without Leaguestart, we're actually sitting at, I think, 60% accuracy or something. Let me actually check that real quick. We're sitting at 60%, yeah, basically 60%. So getting from 60% to 100%, that would cost me so many suffixes and so many passive points that you might just as well go Leaguestart. And if you're thinking just go hits can't be evaded on your weapon, well, that costs, that craft alone costs more than this whole build together at this point, level 80, right? Now, basically, this is just kind of a big deal. Accuracy on trappers, kind of weird. Now then, claw and dagger nodes are just kind of bad for this build overall. Now there are a few clusters, like Poisonous Fang's actually really, really good. But if you look at the other claw nodes, for example, Life Raker, attack speed doesn't do anything, right? Here we have attack speed, which doesn't do anything, crit, which doesn't do anything, and once again, crit, which doesn't do anything. So a lot of the times, these builds kind of get carried of how much they can get out of their weapon-specific clusters, because these are usually way stronger than just the general clusters. And sure, we get trap clusters, right? But still, you would think that for a build that has to make a sacrifice, like getting accuracy, you would get more around it, but you just kind of don't, and you have to get a cluster jewel, which, yeah, isn't really that much of a problem, but at Leaguestart, when you're struggling for currency, it definitely is. Now, next up, and this is probably the biggest one, is you cannot use Nightblade support. And just to be clear, you could theoretically do it, but your traps do not give you elusive, so you would have to get the elusive somewhere else. For example, you have to, like, while you're throwing traps, you have to, like, whirl through enemies. It is a nightmare to play, basically. So yeah, so for a lot of builds nowadays, for a lot of melee builds, for a lot of attack-based builds, Nightblade is just kind of this thing that puts them in playability status, right? And you just don't get that on the skill, so that's kind of a problem. And that then also means that we cannot really use Perfect Agony all that well, because straight up, the nodes just don't do that much if you don't have the crit multi to back it up from the Nightblade. Now, another problem with the skill is that it has no flat damage whatsoever, and it means it's kind of hard to scale at Leaguestart. Now, once again, you could go the LE version, which if you compare it is kind of similar in terms of damage, but it's going to be more expensive to scale. That is if Omniscience get nerfed. If Omniscience stays the same, I think an LE version of this could be a little bit better. Do I think it could be good enough? I still don't ever believe it will get anywhere near some of the other trap builds, but that is definitely a thing. But for a poison build, poison struggles a lot more to get its base damage up. And that is a lot because you do have added chaos damage support, but you don't have some of the auras that, for example, the elemental builds have. They have like Wrath, Anger, Herald of Thunder, Herald of Ice, right? They have a lot better access on rings, and actually our prefixes and our crafted skills are kind of tied up because the mana cost is once again also a problem. It's a trap skill, so we also had to use stuff like Life Tap. So yeah, there's just a huge plethora of reasons why this is kind of hard to scale. So these are all kind of scaling related, but then at the end, in terms of playability, we have the last problem, which is mobile enemies will eat you alive. And that is because of the triple delayed damage of this skill. Now, obviously you could go Ellie and you only have double, right? But with a trap skill, you already have the problem of needing to throw it down, right? Okay, so now it has to proc. Okay, it procced. But then you have two more layers to it, which is they have to stand in there for the full duration to get the full damage. And then if you're poisoned on top, you also have to wait for the poison to go. So talk about delayed damage. It's really, really annoying. And going Ellie kind of alleviates that a little bit. I will definitely admit that, right? The poison build was probably not the best idea to do this. But overall, the skill just doesn't feel very good when you play it. And I can show you this real quickly. I just opened a tier 11 cemetery map to show you. Now, basically, we have our blade trap here. We're using a withered spell totem support. And we have a malevolence that we press. We can't really use stuff like Blood Rage because just for the frenzy charges, it's a little bit bad, right? And we don't really use the attack speed, which once again, one thing you will definitely realize with Blade Trap in general is how many things actually are dependent on attack speed and being able to scale it, right? So if you have a static skill like this, which just does not scale with it, it is super annoying. So you press Q, you have your malevolence up, right? And there we go. Now you can see here, the clearing is like, okay, AoE is definitely not the problem, right? You throw it down, but then whenever you see a rare, you can kind of see the problem with it, right? So if we go down here, I will show you the boss DPS real quick. Now, mind you, this is a T11 map, right? And I'm definitely not going to say that this build has like a crazy good weapon, right? We definitely don't have like the craziest of weapon, but you'll probably have to make do with this one until you get into higher levels, right? This weapon is on par with a wasp nest, right? And it has more AoE, so it's straight up better, right? But the thing is, that's kind of where you will end up here. Whereas spells, for example, still have like a few levels to go. Once you're in T11 maps, you still have like 2 to 3 levels to go, and you will be able to scale your damage. But with Blade Trap, you're kind of dependent on your weapon because your base damage doesn't really go up. Like, look at this damage. It is just not enough for a weapon-based skill. We still need a lot more damage. Like, imagine doing an invitation with this build. It is not going to work all that well. You can do it, as always, but it is going to require a lot more investment, right? So what I want to say, though, is we are a saboteur, right? So we have really good defenses, right? We have 10 regen per second. We have the 15% less damage taken. Everything's blinded. All good and well. We have, actually, we didn't have our auras on. Grace Determination, right? So let's quickly see how the damage goes up, right? Let's see if we can stack our traps. Kinda could, right? A little bit. And if the enemy actually stands here, you can see you get some damage in. But even if it does, this is not what you would want from this build, right? This is the best case scenario. Now think about enemies that just, I don't know, dance out of it, right? Think about invitation scenarios where you have to kite and they run after you, right? You will need stuff like Maim, you will need stuff like Temporal Chains, and even those are not as strong against bosses. So this kind of just solidifies my problem with this build and kind of why I had to call it at level 80. I don't think this one is going to scale into late game and can do some of the harder invitations. But in the end, what did we learn about Blade Trap? Now, number one, Blade Trap has not enough scaling options. I think this is one of the perfect examples for one of those skills that look good on paper, but when you look at the multipliers that you can actually use, losing attack speed, right? Having this awkward accuracy that you can't really fix, it just doesn't really make sense in the end. It's really, really, really hard to get across. Like, for example, right? Like stuff like frenzy charges, they just don't give you the attack speed part, right? Claw nodes, they just don't give you the attack speed part. If you want to get the accuracy nodes, it doesn't give you the crit or the attack speed part. The build just kind of doesn't make any sense, and it kind of feels like they haven't given it too much thought. As well as that, just small things, right? Like slave drivers not working with attack speed. There's just a little bit too much kind of weird I just kind of have a weird feeling about this build, and it just didn't end up happening in the end. There was not enough scaling options. Most of your scaling options would probably be something like Omni with Ellie, which we all know is a thing, right? If Omni doesn't get nerfed, elemental damage scaling might be good for this build. It might be its best option. But then again, ask yourself, you're going to need investment for this to work. And then also ask yourself, why wouldn't you just play Seismic Trap, Fire Trap, Explosive Trap's really good, right? Even Ice Trap. There's so many better alternatives out there. Why bother in the first place? Unless you really love the skill, you love how it looks, you love how it feels. But for me, it just lacked quality of life. It lacked damage. It basically lacked anything that I would want from a League starter. And that is why overall, I just wouldn't recommend it. I'm not even going to talk about the build. I'm not going to pretend like this is anything you could do and you just have to make it work or something. I hope that Blade Trap gets a lot more love in the end at some point, maybe. I don't think radius is enough, right? They did buff the radius at some point. That's not enough. It needs more. If you ever try this one out, Elemental, I would definitely recommend going for an Omni variant. I hope it lives through the league. But yeah, that's basically all I wanted to say here. I hope you watched this in, I don't know, 3.21 when Blade Trap now is a #1 skill. And you can flame me down in the comments. It's like the best skill ever. It got buffed by 100%, right? Sure, but as for now, stay away from this one, and hope you enjoyed the video. But that's it for the video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, subscribe. As always, a huge shout out to my Twitch subscribers and my Patreons. I couldn't do videos like this without you. Thank you so much for the support. But yeah, that's where I'm going to leave the build for now. I really hope this skill gets a little bit of love in the future. Like I said, maybe at like mid-tier gear with like a Paradoxica with an Omni. It could make a little bit more sense. As for now, I don't think this is something you should League start. Trappers right now have a wide array of options, so you're not going to be too sad about it. But with that being said, since I still don't have a slogan, see you next time.